Welcome back to Lessons from the Middle. Have you ever wondered why one child just feels harder than another? Maybe you've asked yourself, what am I doing wrong? Or felt like your parenting strategies just aren't working, or it just feels like it's so much easier for everybody else. I've been there. When I had my first child, I really thought I was nailing this whole parenting thing. She was easygoing, adaptable, and what many might call a quote-unquote well-behaved child. I really took pride in thinking that her temperament reflected my solid parenting skills. And then I had my second child, and I think many of us with multiple children can see that there's a difference between each of them. You know, my second, he was just like the happiest baby. If you know him, he has this infectious laugh that just makes everybody around him smile. He feels his happiness, every emotion just so deeply. But by the age of 3, I really started noticing these really big emotions and behaviors. He had intense reactions. He just had this constant need for physical stimulation. So he needed to touch people and be moving. It was just so much sensory that he was seeking. And then he would have meltdowns that could last well over 20 minutes. And when it would get to a certain point, I would just look at him in those moments when he was really dysregulated, and you could just see in his eyes how dysregulated he was. And it was just really hard as a mom to sit there and see your child in that way and just wonder, what can I do to help? I knew it wasn't typical based on what I had already experienced for my first child. And as my third came along, he, again, kind of goes back to that more easier temperament. I haven't seen a lot of those behaviors that I saw with my second with him, which has just been another reminder that each kid is different. And as a school counselor, I was used to helping families navigate challenges similar to this. I'd often work with all of the kids in a family, and it was fascinating to see how different siblings could be. And the truth is that it's really not just about our kids and their behavior. It's also about how we feel as parents, because studies show that 90% of parents feel judged based on their children's behavior. And for those raising a child with a more challenging temperament, that number jumps to 100%. And I totally get why. I've been there, sweating it out in the grocery store during a meltdown, or realizing that my child, who was so excited for a soccer practice, now refuses to participate. And I also know what it feels like to hear the whispers, the judgment from others, or even the voice in your own head that's saying, what's wrong with my kid? Why are they struggling? What's wrong with me? But here's what I've learned. One of the hardest lessons in parenting is realizing that we can't control our children. A lot of our old school parenting strategies are about control. And with our kids who have easier temperaments, this can feel like it gives us a false sense that you can control them. And then you have a child who has a more difficult temperament and you realize that, nope, I can't. But what we can do is we can really understand them more deeply. Temperament, sensitivity, and nervous system regulation has been life-changing for me as a mom and as a parent coach. These 3 things have taught me how to let go of a lot of judgment, both mine and others, and see each of my kids for who they truly are. Because the truth is, we can't parent each child the same way. They each need something different, and when we meet them where they are, we can build a connection that helps them thrive. So today, we're going to be talking about temperament, what it is, why it matters, and how understanding it can transform the way you parent. And my hope is that you'll leave this episode with some light bulb moments, just like so many of the parents that I've worked with have had. So first of all, what is temperament? And it's the combination of traits that we're born with, so our natural way of responding to the world. Research shows that temperament is about 50% genetics, and then 50% influenced by how we're raised or our environment. Back in the 1970s, Dr. Thomas Boyce introduced this really beautiful way of understanding temperament. And there started to be a conversation of not only temperament, but also blending it with sensitivity. And so he started to categorize people into 2 groups, dandelions and orchids. And then later, the tulip was added as this middle ground. I love these metaphors because they paint such a vivid picture. And I really want to break this down for you because I think it's so helpful. So the 3 temperament categories, and this, by the way, this isn't just our kids, it's also us as adults. So as you hear this, you might really understand a little bit more about you and your kids. So dandelions, this group of people make up about 30% of our population. So if we think about dandelions, they're really resilient. They are these little plants that can grow just about anywhere, right? The cracks of sidewalks, like you can mow them down and they'll come back up. They really can thrive in just about any environment with little care. So in temperament terms, these are our kids who are easygoing. They are outgoing. They can try new situations with ease. Little rattles them, and they just really seem to kind of go with the flow. Our tulip kids, this group represents about 40% of the population. And so take it a step further on that sensitivity spectrum. They're a little bit more sensitive than the dandelions, but they're still balanced. So like the flower, tulips do need some care to thrive, but they're generally pretty steady. So these might be our kids who are a little bit more slow to warm, and once they know the routine, they're good. They might need a little bit more explanation or predictability, but overall, they've got it. So orchids, our last group, this is about 25 to 30% of the population. So if we think about sensitivity on a spectrum, dandelions being the least, tulips right in the middle, orchids are our most highly sensitive group of people. And if you think about an orchid, orchids are beautiful, but they do require quite a bit of care in order to really allow them to bloom and thrive. So you can't just like plop this somewhere and hope that that's it, right? You need to figure out like an ice cube trick to get it or the perfect lighting. But with the proper care and nurturing, it can thrive. And that's what we see with these kids is because they are more sensitive, that when we can understand that, you know what, they are going to be maybe more resistant to change or new situations. They might be more introverted. They might need a lot more routine and predictability than our other kids with different temperaments. But when we can start to see these areas which they're sensitive and these little things that make them up, that's when they can really start to thrive. And it's not that we are avoiding things. It's that we are seeing their sensitivity, we're accommodating it or nurturing it in order to allow them to be seen and to fully grow. So when we have a kid who's either a tulip or an orchid, they just need a little bit more in order to thrive. And so with temperament, I think even just learning about these 3 different categories, it starts to allow you to see your kids for who they truly are. You know, again, this is a spectrum, so we're not trying to put kids in boxes. They're each individuals, and it's not a reflection of your parenting. And there's a quote that I love by Dr. Lisa Pressman, when she says, "You're not going to make a social butterfly out of a hermit crab." So when we can start to see our kids for who they are based on their temperament, we can stop trying to mold them into something they're not and instead meet them where they are. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with another powerful quote, which is, "When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower." And this is why it's so important for us as parents to do this work. We can't, quote unquote, fix our kids, but we can adjust their environment. We as the parents are the ones who are creating that environment. And we can also control how we show up for them. And when we do, we can create the conditions for them to bloom. Next week, we're going to take what we've learned about temperament and we're going to start to talk a little bit more about sensitivity. As I said, temperament is really just this spectrum of sensitivity. So we're going to talk about how sensitivity shapes our kids' nervous systems and impacts their day-to-day lives, as well as practical strategies to support them in feeling safe and secure and really understood for who they are. And so if today's episode sparked some light bulb moments for you, you definitely don't want to miss that episode. And I'd also love for you to share with me about your dandelion, tulip, or orchid kids. Do you recognize these traits in your own children or even in yourself? Share your thoughts with me on Instagram or send me an email. I'd really love to connect with you and hear your stories. And finally, if you were curious about gaining a deeper understanding of your child's temperament, sensitivity, and nervous system, learning how to create an environment where they can thrive, I would love for you to check out my group coaching program that's starting in February. You know, as I share all of this work, I think it's really helpful to know that I am right there in the middle of it with you, applying all of this information with my own children every single day. So not only am I sharing everything that I've learned with you in this group coaching, but you can also bet that I am right there with you. And so you can find the link in the show notes or email me directly to learn more. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am here with you, learning and growing right alongside you, and I will see you next week.